This is episode 521 of the Rio Grande Foundation's Tipping Point, New Mexico. I'm Paul Gessing, president of the Rio Grande Foundation, New Mexico's free market think tank. You can find out more about the foundation at riograndefoundation.org. I am very pleased to be joined by Chris Hunter. He is a consultant with Cornerstone Business Solutions, and he works with, among others, the Four Corners Economic Development and NAPI. That is the Navajo Agricultural Products Organization. As you might discern from that introduction, Chris is from the Four Corners region of New Mexico. Welcome to Tipping Point, New Mexico, Chris.
Hey, thanks, Paul. Good to be here today and share on these important topics.
Yeah, and I look forward to digging into some of those with you. But this is a statewide show with people from all over the state of New Mexico that we talk to on a regular basis, different voices, of course. And what is going on in the Four Corners in terms of its economy? I was looking at natural gas prices, and in the wake of the invasion of Ukraine by Putin, prices had gone quite a bit up, and seems like natural gas prices have returned back to their lower levels that we've seen in recent years. And talk about that, and just the impact on the Four Corners economy, if you will.
Sure. Well, there's a lot more to the Four Corners economy than just natural gas, but in the arena of natural gas, you're correct, Paul. Prices are down some. That is slowing down some development in terms of new well drilling. Of course, natural gas has not got the sex and sizzle of oil in the Permian Basin. There is obviously a change over time in natural gas here in the basin with the introduction of private equity owners. So there's a lot more focus on efficiency, more gas being produced with fewer workers, which is a good thing, makes that energy more sustainable. I think the initial price bumps you saw with Ukraine, people recognize were anomalies. Natural gas is a stable, solid infrastructure here in New Mexico, and so there's plenty of supply. It'll be interesting to see how natural gas prices short-term vary with the incredible heat wave that the desert Southwest is experiencing. And obviously natural gas is a critical component in meeting those peak electric demand loads that we see in the heating season. But over and beyond natural gas, unemployment in San Juan County has ticked up just very slightly from over the last month, but is down still from levels a year ago. The Department of Workforce Solutions report that came out for the month of May, the most recent report, does not highlight a trend I think that is common across the state, maybe the nation, and that's the permanent withdrawal of workers from the workforce as a result of the major dislocations from COVID. But our unemployment rate at where it is right now is suggesting that it's tougher for employers to get employees, and that's not unusual across the state. And then lastly, I'd share retail activity in San Juan County is strong and continues to remain strong. And although that's not a huge wealth generator, it's very much supportive of the substantial base of gross receipts tax revenue that supports the quality of life in the city of Farmington and San Juan County. So those things aren't going anywhere.
And of course, the shuttering of the San Juan Generating Station was a big economic blow to the Four Corners. How are things going absent that that facility, the tax revenues, the jobs that facility created?
Well, I think in today's Daily Times, there's an interesting article talking about the Department of Workforce Solutions distributing $6.3 million of Energy Transition Act funds to displaced workers, 90% of that money being distributed to San Juan County residents. I'd point out, Paul, that $6.3 million on a one-time payment basis is nothing compared to $100 million plus of annualized payroll alone from those workers. I am sure that there is an outflow of people from San Juan County associated with those direct jobs. Coal mining is a declining industry everywhere. And obviously, I'm not sure where and how Local 614 of the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers is placing all of those union electrical workers. I don't know that there are jobs here locally to do that. So jobs is one impact. Obviously, the property tax base is a big hit, particularly to central consolidated schools. And the other power plant here in San Juan County that we need to be mindful of, Paul, is the Four Corners power plant, owned and operated, operated by Arizona Public Service Company, owned in part by APS and Navajo Transitional Energy Company. And as a result of a Supreme Court ruling for a while longer, New Mexico Supreme Court ruling by PNM, that power plant and associated coal mine provides 40% of the operating budget to the Navajo Nation. So is very much on our radar, and we're mindful of that. And a little known development that should be on your listeners' radar is the fact that the DOE is working with both NTEC and Enchant Energy at the potential repurposing of that plant to a CO2 sequestration machine, as well as an electricity producer, as APS exits that plant no later than 2031. And that, of course, would be a huge help in preserving an anchor to our local economy and the Navajo Nation. So there's some quick top lines for you, Paul.
Yeah, thanks. That's a great report. Now, maybe you can be the official reporting arm for the local Four Corners Economic Development Group, because you did a very nice job sharing some of the big issues facing the economy up there, and good stuff. So if maybe MSNBC or Fox Business ever need Four Corners, they got that covered with you, Chris. So thank you. Now we're going to dive into a topic that has a lot of implications for the Four Corners economy, because at least the leading opportunity there for hydrogen in that transition involves natural gas, but the environmentalists want to see a different form of hydrogen technology take hold, and they've been kind of the lead organization or lead efforts in fighting hydrogen and that transition. Talk about hydrogen technology, kind of broadly speaking, and what is afoot in New Mexico, especially as being pushed by Governor Lujan Grisham.
Sure, a lot there, Paul, to chew on. So if I run on, give me the high sign here. Let's start with technology. There has been a characterization of hydrogen production technologies associated with colors. So different colors meaning different things. There is some weakness to that analogy in that the colors automatically brushstroke the amount of carbon dioxide put out by any particular sort of production technology. So if we talk about quote unquote green hydrogen, typically that would be hydrogen produced with what's called electrolysis, which is a very energy input intensive process of splitting water molecules, but not using any carbon fuel to make the energy to do that with. And of course, the externality, if we can use economists talk for a moment, is the fact that it requires acres and acres and acres of solar panels or acres and acres of wind turbines. Obviously, we don't have a lot of wind turbines here in Northwest New Mexico, but there is obviously in central New Mexico. But, to produce the amount of electricity to make the green hydrogen that might be required for a large commercial farm like NAPI, you're talking about occupying, multiple thousands of acres of irrigated farmland. So that's green hydrogen. Blue hydrogen, which is typically what the environmentalists, or gray hydrogen, either one, are railing against, is the production of hydrogen using as either input energy or methane itself, which is natural gas, as the feedstock to split off the hydrogen molecules. It typically, when we talk about gray hydrogen, would be an unsequestered project. I'm not aware of any gray hydrogen project developments underway in the Western US because of the carbon footprint issue or emissions issue. But also importantly, because the carbon sequestration tax credits are so incentivizing that people want to instead look at blue hydrogen, which is also using natural gas, but the natural gas used in combustion to make heat to separate hydrogen molecules from natural gas are sequestered. So those are the two big ones out there. The New Mexico projects that are part of the Western Interstate Hydrogen Hub are a combination of both green and blue hydrogen. There are 3 hydrogen projects slated for San Juan County as part of the 8 projects in total that are being advanced by the Western Interstate Hydrogen Hub, of which Governor Lujan Grisham is strongly supportive of, as are the senators from each of the states of Utah, Wyoming, Colorado, and New Mexico. So there are pros and cons, I suppose you could say, to all of the different types of hydrogen, but hydrogen is coming sooner or later. I think one of the things that gets overlooked in hydrogen in a transformative sort of way is its use as a motive fuel. We've all heard, and you've talked along with Wally often about the challenges of EV vehicles and range and lithium ion batteries and mining and raw materials. And now I see China's getting ready to potentially put some embargoes on rare earth minerals. Hydrogen and fuel cells is something that doesn't have the range limitations. Obviously, we've got infrastructure you have to build out. And in the same way, at the turn of the century through the 20s and 30s, we were building petroleum stations. I can see a future with hydrogen stations and fuel cells as motive power. So lots happening with hydrogen, Paul.
Yeah, and I was not aware of so-called gray hydrogen, and that's a new one. I've only heard of blue and green. So
I didn't even talk about pink, and that's nuclear powered hydrogen production. So yeah, there's lots of different colors, whole spectrum.
Wow. Well, pink hydrogen. I mean, just first time I've ever heard of that one. Anything involving nuclear, it seems like you can do great things with that, because the problem is always the genuine energy source. With all due respect to hydrogen,
Right.
Nuclear, the problem is getting the nuclear online and getting that
No
utilized.
question.
So,
and Paul, I'd really like for you to think about hydrogen as a conduit of energy. So that's really what it is. It is not in and of itself an energy source, although it's the most abundant element of all the elements on the periodic table. It has to be produced. It doesn't exist in its free state. It has to be carved off, if you will, from something. And it's just an energy carrier. That's all it really is. So I think in looking at hydrogen economics, you really need to look at the input energy cost and scale as the primary determiners of economic validity for the different techniques.
Well, thanks for that explanation. And that sets up my next question nicely. So, of course, the governor is behind not nuclear. She's behind blue hydrogen, which, of course, does involve fossil fuels, natural gas. The environmentalists oppose her on that. So can you walk us through the reason why, the governor, who is far and away the most radical governor New Mexico's ever had, or at least since before Gary Johnson on environmental issues, somebody who really is to the left on those issues, why she supports something that the environmental base of her party opposes, and are there legitimate objections from the environmental perspective to blue hydrogen, or what's got their ire up in terms of the environmental groups on this issue?
Well, I can't obviously comment on what the governor is thinking about. I mean, she's her own person. But first off, I think from a state of New Mexico perspective, it makes sense to be supportive of blue hydrogen because we have an abundance of natural gas, and natural gas, whether produced on federal lands or state lands or the limited amount of private lands that are natural gas producing, are a source of significant royalty and severance taxes to the state of New Mexico. The blue hydrogen idea or concept involves full CO2 sequestration, so you're not emitting carbon dioxide through the combustion of natural gas. Obviously, the really strong anti-hydrogen from fossil fuel crowd is not only opposed to CO2 emissions, which industry effectively mitigates, and I think in the case of the NAPI project, which hopefully we'll be able to talk about here in a minute, could be a carbon negative project. The real issue, I think, is what they're concerned about, which is methane leakage. And methane as a natural gas is a greenhouse gas, and it is more contributive to greenhouse global warming, if you will, than is carbon dioxide. Of course, what the anti-crowd never points out to you is how much that methane or fugitive methane reduction has occurred over the last 10 or 15 years. And they would say as a result of regulation, if they even acknowledged it. I would point out that the reduction has come simply because industry is more efficient and technology is better, and it's methane that goes through the meter that is actually the cash generator for the producer. So it's very focused on reducing fugitive methane emissions. So the governor has reasons to support it. The environmentalists, I think, have some specious reasons to work against it.
Yeah. And I understand that you can't put yourself in the governor's shoes there, but she's obviously a strong proponent of it. And to my knowledge, I think there's been a couple efforts at the legislature to pass bills on hydrogen, but the governor has had to act on her own. And so can you describe where that activity lies? I know a lot of this hydrogen effort involves federal dollars coming out of Washington and the fight for being a hydrogen hub. Can you share, since, I mean, will there be another effort legislatively on this, or is this just going to be done kind of administratively by the governor? And what is the state of play in that?
Well, that's a good one, Paul. I don't have a definitive answer. If we roll the clock back to the legislative session prior to this one, I think hydrogen attempts at providing an industrial development authority equivalent and all being singularly at this point led by the work of Patty Lundstrom on behalf of the Escalante plant conversion was such a new concept and idea for legislators that it was easy to buy into the environmental agenda or to an anti development authority agenda, or whatever reason that got shot down several times in several different permutations in spite of heroic efforts by the sponsors. But I think really the key in the state as a whole, and it's really a national issue, is the education of the electorate on hydrogen and what it can do and what it can't do and how it works and why a national imperative for hydrogen development. And a lot of that spade work has not been happening at the speed that industry development or federal stimulus through DOE grants or hydrogen production tax credits or CO2 credits have been promulgated. So you've got, policy leaders at a federal level ahead of the knowledge level of state and local officials. And then that problem is compounded by environmentalists busy pointing out that carbon sequestration, for example, doesn't work, or fugitive methane is a huge issue, or whatever. Again, it's convenient that environmentalists are always supportive of green hydrogen, even if it takes 10,000 acres of solar panels. There's obviously no opportunity cost to agriculture, for example, by covering up 10,000 acres of land. So I think that's probably, Paul, how I would summarize that.
Okay. So how much federal dollars are we talking about here? And, what would it do for, obviously you're a Four Corners guy, you're interested in developing the economy. And, I appreciate the fact that, it's a area that's got a lot of challenges facing it. And you're going to do whatever you can to help that local area out. So whether it's federal dollars or investment by the private sector, and this is certainly going to involve both. What are we talking about here with regard to federal
Sure.
federal spending?
Well, so remember, the stimulus underneath all of this for San Juan County is the fact that energy production has always been a cornerstone hallmark of the county's economy, right along with agriculture and retail. Under the Infrastructure Act, the U.S. Department of Energy issued a $9+ billion grant call for the development of large commercial hydrogen production facilities in the country. There were 70 different facilities or hubs that advanced concept papers. 33 were encouraged to proceed. And of those 33, one was the consortium known as WISH, which is the Western Interstate Hydrogen Hub, which is a collaboration of 4 states. And you couldn't ask for a more interesting combination of 4 states politically than Utah, Wyoming, Colorado, and New Mexico. However, all 4 of those states have input ingredients that suit themselves well for the production of large-scale hydrogen, whether it be solar or natural gas. And New Mexico and WISH applied for $1.2 billion, which is the maximum amount that any particular hub could apply for, and submitted its not just its concept paper, but now the application. We're waiting to hear on that. We're optimistic that our projects, there's a total of 8 across the 4 states, 3 of which are in San Juan County, and 5 of which are in New Mexico. So think about this materiality wise, Paul. The grants, $1.2 billion, are required to be matched 50% with private money. And I think they will be catalytic if awarded to a lot of capital investment in dollars across the state. So that's property tax base, again, for projects that use green or blue hydrogen. That's royalty and severance tax dollars for the associated natural gas, and all the other things that come along with pivoting. If you look at San Juan County in 1960 to 65, a huge sea change happened with the building of the Four Corners power plant, followed in the early 70s with San Juan Generating Station. This will be just as big a transformation with our 3 projects here if they develop. And the government, I mean, we can argue about the pros and cons of subsidy. You know my leanings as a conservative person, but national transformation, typically, whether it's pharmacology or energy or transportation, requires participation and demonstration of societal will through grants and tax incentives.
Well, a question related to that, and I don't know whether you have the answer or not, so I'll ask it anyway. What is the carbon intensity of, and this is from purely the environmental perspective with the cost basis factored in. What's the carbon intensity of the hydrogen, blue hydrogen, versus continuing to do things basically the way we are? And, is that money well spent, assuming that the goal here is reducing CO2 emissions? You understand, like, there are many different ways, you could have carbon sequestration and other approaches to reducing CO2 in the atmosphere. Is this considered to be a reasonably efficient mechanism for doing things more efficiently in terms of CO2, or where do you see that whole situation?
Well, clearly, underpinning H2 development, societal policy from the federal government, and then subsequently supported by the state, CO2 reductions is an end game in mind for sure. The effectiveness of its reductions, I think, varies by how the CO2 is used. If you use CO2 to displace diesel fuel for over-the-road trucking, it's hugely effective. And if you use either, fully sequestered blue hydrogen or green hydrogen, then all of the emissions associated with that transportation segment are removed. In the case of what we're talking about at the Navajo Agricultural Products Industry demonstration project, the farm using blue hydrogen would actually be a negative carbon producer. The EPA reports that the ag sector is 11% of point source emissions of CO2 nationally. And between the CO2 sequestration used in steam reformation at NAPI, plus some innovative soils work that New Mexico State is proposing, the NAPI farm actually would be carbon negative. So even though its hydrogen is produced using steam reformation. So I think, the answer can vary on different sorts of technologies and approaches and markets, but, hydrogen is certainly, I think, very strongly positioned to compete against batteries and all of the carbon footprint associated with mining and manufacturing and all of that. I can tell you that a determining factor in the EPA, or not EPA, DOE grants is the life cycle analysis of carbon. So they are very much looking at that, as well as community benefits and feasibility of technologies and everything else. So Paul, all that's being taken into account. It'll be interesting to see what projects are awarded and what the DOE has to say in their various press releases about how they reach their conclusions on the distribution of the $9 billion.
Got it. Well, that makes a lot of sense. Now, you mentioned NAPI. We haven't really brought up NAPI and what it is. Folks outside of the Four Corners may not be aware of what NAPI is. It's an acronym, of course. As is so often the case with government, you get one of those lovely acronyms. What is NAPI and how do they play into this effort?
Well, NAPI is a large commercial farm owned by the Navajo Nation. Its chief water supply comes from the San Juan River and Navajo Lake. All of that infrastructure was built to support that farm. It has 75,000 acres under pivot or irrigated, and anybody that drives up from Albuquerque to Farmington sees just a very small portion of that farm. So the NAPI project is really oriented around, Paul, something you and Wally talk a lot about, and that's electricity. It takes a tremendous amount of electricity to power moving water through 75,000 acres of large-scale sprinkler systems. Water doesn't flow uphill, water doesn't pressurize naturally to go through sprinklers, et cetera. With the challenges that the Western electric grid has been experiencing over the last year or so that you extensively report on, NAPI's electric bill has gone up 20 to 30% month over month for the last 6 or 8 months. Even more than that is the concerns that NAPI management has about electric reliability. And that's important because farming requires water 24/7 in terms of getting the best crop yields. So NAPI is working with its project to become electrically self-sufficient, making its own electricity through a blend of natural gas and hydrogen fuel, and displacing all of its diesel fuel use with hydrogen in partnerships with its ag equipment companies like John Deere and Case New Holland and others, going back to the fuel cell idea. If you made an electrified tractor, a Tesla tractor, if you will, and you put it into an irrigated farm field, you'd have to dig that tractor out from China. Just the weight of the tractor alone would sink it. So we're excited to create a very large scale demonstration farm and also provide some societal benefits in that the greenhouses associated with this project would go a long ways to helping with the food desert that we see here in terms of not having adequate and affordable access to produce. It was interesting in working on development of the DOE grant. I was working with people specializing in community benefits back in Virginia who had no idea that there were people in San Juan County that were 60 miles from a grocery store. So that's the kind of stuff that we're working on transforming here.
Yeah, and just to give people an idea, how big of a deal is NAPI? Because if you don't see it, you don't know what they really have going up there. I've had potatoes that were from NAPI, but talk a little bit just about within the scale of agriculture, especially here in New Mexico.
Well, I'm sure it's the largest farm in New Mexico. It employs 400 to 500 Navajo, depending upon what season. So 98% of the workforce is Navajo. It's a profitable farm. It produces dividends every year for the Navajo Nation. It is something that the Navajo Nation culturally is very proud of and supportive of. But the fiscal resiliency of the farm is very much dependent upon this energy cost problem that I laid out for you with electricity. So, labor is always an expense, but when you're watering 75,000 acres and you got power bills going up like that, plus reliability, this is a strategic threat to the farm. So the farm was very interested in seeing what it could do to set itself up for a new generation of sustainable farming.
Yeah, and like all agriculture in New Mexico, it's pretty heavily reliant on irrigation. There, the land that NAPI is farming is not necessarily, it's not along the Rio Grande Valley. It's pretty much desert land that needs very intensive irrigation.
Absolutely, and the only way to profitably farm it is not only with irrigation but scale. So, each one of these pivots would irrigate 600 to 750 acres at a time.
Yeah. All right. Well, so let's dive into any other issues that you want to address in here. We've got a few minutes left in the show, and I want to make sure you get an opportunity to share any other issues in terms of hydrogen. I guess, but as I move to that conversation, as a free market guy, and I know you are as well, but I also know that you're kind of fighting for your community, your own area of the state, and trying to keep it economically viable. And hydrogen is certainly a way to do that using large quantities of federal dollars. But looking at it kind of more broadly speaking, if you're a free market guy or gal in Montana or Florida or Albuquerque, is this an entire proposition that is worth supporting, or should we maybe be really looking to go back to a more free market environment without the subsidies and mandates on these kinds of energy production tools?
Well, Paul, that's a big question. It goes back again to the carbon dioxide equation. So, I personally, it's my own personal belief. I believe in global climate change. I think climate change is always happening. I believe CO2 contributes to global warming. I believe mankind emits CO2. I also believe that climate change happens whether or not mankind was around or not. I drive up to Colorado on the La Plata Highway and I see a glacial moraine from a melted glacier that obviously must have experienced warming temperatures. So maybe it was caveman's cave fires. I think the bus has left the station in regards to what society is saying on carbon dioxide, both federally and at a state level. I think it's important for us to be good stewards of the resources committed to reducing carbon dioxide. I think the requirements of private capital match are important in grants. So these are not just given away. And it's a competitive grant process. So our ability as a state with our projects to demonstrate efficacy of as low a cost hydrogen production as possible and maximum CO2 sequestration, or in the case of NAPI's farm negative carbon emissions, is a worthwhile endeavor to look at since the policy decisions are made. And I don't see us going back to totally a free market as it relates to carbon dioxide emissions.
Well, that's a very fair approach, and I appreciate all the information you have shared with us today. Since I did ask that question, I'll give you one more chance. Did I miss anything, or is there anything that you want people to know about who are listening to this show? Even it could be a website, contact information, or potential legislation, something that they can get involved in, or find more information out for themselves.
Yeah, I would love for people to go to a website, and the website is 4 cornersed.com. So the number 4 cornersed.com. That is the website of Four Corners Economic Development. You'll see a pop-up to subscribe to our bi-weekly newsletter. We have a very high open rate, Paul, on a subscriber base of approaching 2,000. But on the website, you'll find a page entitled Clean Hydrogen and Petrochemicals Manufacturing, and you'll find fact sheets on the New Mexico projects here in San Juan County, the memorandum of understanding that formed WISH across the 4 states, a link to the New Mexico Environment Department on hydrogen. And I would encourage to the fullest extent possible our listeners here to inform themselves about hydrogen using the resources that are out there. And over time, Paul, I know you're going to collect a list of frequently asked questions. And I think it's incumbent on industry and policymakers to continue to put out science-based, I hate to use that word the way it's been politicized, but science-based or academic institution-based answers to hydrogen and its pros and cons. And I would point out again that the environmentalists who are opposed to blue hydrogen conveniently ignore other costs of externalities associated with other forms of hydrogen. Every kind of energy, Paul, has its own upsides and downsides. As you well know, there is no such thing as a cost-free energy source.
All right. Well, I appreciate your time today, Chris Hunter, and I encourage folks to go to that 4 cornersed.com and find more information out there about this important and ongoing issue here in New Mexico, and especially in the Four Corners, but definitely across the entire state. It's a very timely issue. So thanks for listening to this week's episode. Find all episodes at tippingpointnm.com or at the Rio Grande Foundation's YouTube channel. Subscribe to the show at Apple, Stitcher, or tell Google Home to play Tipping Point New Mexico. Thanks to Path 3 Marketing for producing this show.